Well, all I can really say is what a year it's been. For the first time in a while, it seems like things are really on the upswing in both the IMSA Sports Car Championship and the World Endurance Championship in terms of manufacturer engagement, team growth, and spectator interest. As everyone else has already said, Golden Age. We saw the LMDH class debut and find its feet remarkably quickly. Golden Age. We bid goodbye to some long-standing teams and partnerships. Golden Age. And we saw some serious shakeups in terms of what next year's race grids will look like on both sides of the Atlantic. As far as video structure, I'll discuss IMSA in this one, with WEC and Le Mans to come in a week or two, touching briefly on the major changes, announcements, etc. going into the season, talking through each race, hopefully at a more detailed level than you'll get from those extended highlight clips that NBC makes, but still with much greater brevity than if you were to sit down and watch all 24, 12, plus 6, 70 hours of racing, plus qualifying sessions, which I've instead done for you, frying my brain in the process, finally closing out with what next year is likely to bring. As such, this video is going to be the length of a feature film by my best estimations, so grab a bevy or a six-pack, jump around as desired to the bits that most interest you, or if you're just looking for a way to bid goodbye to an hour or three, let's get started. Incidentally, if I may provide a beverage recommendation, I did a lot of the race watching, summarizing, scripting, and splicing for this video while enjoying Duncan Taylor 5-star blended scotch, which is both quite reasonably priced, just shy of $30 for a handle in my local Total Wine, and quite good for the price bracket. I prefer it immensely to Johnny Black, but of course, #NotSpawn. Other beverage options are available. Drink responsibly. Etc., etc., etc. In a lot of ways, the 2023 IMSA season kicked off about 12 hours after the checkered flag fell at Petit Le Mans last October at Road Atlanta, with the new LMDH vehicles taking advantage of the track condition post-race to put in some serious testing miles in preparation for the next year. All four manufacturers, Acura, BMW, Cadillac, and Porsche, had overwinter testing campaigns and arrived at Daytona in January ready to kick off the new season. The roar before the 24, the traditional pre-weekend testing session Cume Light Race Weekend Cume New Year's Shakedown, changed slightly in format, with the qualifying race removed, but practice sessions and scrutineering remained. Acura and Cadillac largely set the pace during qualifying, unsurprising given their multi-year participation in DPI, but the Porsche set the fastest time in the third practice session, the only session not topped by one of the DPI alumnuses. Alumni? DPI alumni? Well, that rhymes, so let's go with that. Anyway, come qualifying, the number 60 Meyershank Racing Acura, driven by Tom Blomqvist, was the fastest of the debutante LMDH/GTPs, pursued extremely closely by the number 7 Porsche 963, driven by Felipe Nasr. The other Porsche, after a crash leaving the newly renamed Le Mans chicane, previously the bus stop, was left with no time, as its two fastest laps were deleted per regulations. The other Acura qualified in third, pursued by all of the Cadillacs, and the two BMWs were the slowest of the new class, although all cars posted a 1:34-something as their best time. Not a bad result for a BOP class on its first outing, although admittedly at this point all the cars were running without BOP modifications, which honestly makes the result even more impressive if you think about it. LMP2 was led by an Oreca throughout the sessions, Quelle surprise, with PR1 Matheson Motorsports, that's the wins car to us spectators, topping two sessions as well as qualifying, with Ben Keating posting the fastest time among the bronze drivers by over a second, Quelle surprise again. This session was also curtailed after a crash by John Ferrano in the Tower Motorsports car. This is another recurring theme that crosses the seasons and the championships and the race everythings, and I've developed something of a rather staunch dislike for this team over the past few years, as they've shown a consistent and demonstrated inability to stop themselves from running into walls, gravel traps, and other cars, making a general hash of things and diminishing the ability of other teams to enjoy their race. I will explain and show more later on, but those of you who watched or attended Le Mans will require a whole bevy of incidents this team caused in the pre-race sessions, including running illegal ride height sensors in testing, riding off a chassis after running into an Aston Martin, and then crashing during the race itself, although the race crash I'm a bit less liable to blame Ricky Taylor for, instead of the less than ideal conditions and rather confusing slow zone procedures. For a further demonstration of the inherent danger of being on track at the same time as a Tower Motorsports LMP2, I recommend watching last year's, 2022's, 12 Hours of Sebring, when the car seems to have forgotten that it was on a track rather than the Ubanga Banga bumper cars at Busch Gardens in Tampa. LMP3 certainly had things happen, although frankly I've never been able to get particularly worked up about it as a class. I have pretty consistently heard that they're quite fun to drive, and they do have a nice V8 rumble to them, but they always just kind of seem to be a bit in the way, especially on shorter tracks. Nico Pino qualified the fastest of the LMP3s nonetheless, racing a Ligier for Sean Creech Motorsport. Two new GTD/GT3 cars made their debut from Porsche, their latest iteration of the 911, and from Ferrari with the 296 GT3 replacing the old 488, and marking the first time, as best I can tell, that a Ferrari has run a V6 in competition. They still sound quite good, though, with a lovely little turbo chirp whistle on throttle liftoff. Mercedes was the class of the field, however, and largely topped the practice sessions while locking out the top 4 spots in qualifying between GTD and GTD Pro. The race itself started slowly. The number 60 Acura took off with remarkable speed before the Tower Motorsports car stopped with mechanical problems on the first lap. No doubt most of the other teams breathed a slight sigh of relief for their bodywork budgets with this stoppage of the unlucky number 8, but it did bring out the safety car for several laps. On the restart, yet again, the Meyershank Acura flew away from the rest of the GTP field. Kinky. The BMWs struggled, as brand new race cars are wont to do, with reliability issues, with the number 25 car heading to the pits after only 1 hour. It took over 3 hours for it to rejoin the race, at which point it was fully in test session mode and many dozens of laps down. The lead of the race in all classes changed hands numerous times, although both Acura prototypes were decidedly quick. The Wins LMP2 was doing its usual excellent job, and LMP3 was LMP3, although one of them did catch fire about halfway through the race. The track seemed to favor the front-engined cars in GTD, with Mercedes and Aston Martins largely leading the field, but all of the battling essentially came to naught in the lead-up to the end of the race, as a number of safety cars in the final 3 hours, when combined with the pass-around rules, kept the competitors in closer contention, perhaps more so than might have occurred naturally. The final green flag flew with 26 minutes left on the clock. Despite challenges from the Cadillacs early in the race, the number 60 Acura streaked away from the field once again, but this time with its, well, it's not really a sister car, but I guess you could call it their cousin car, in close pursuit. In LMP2, an uncharacteristic late race off by veteran Nicolas Lapierre in the Wins Oreca dropped it from contention, and the battle came down to what can only be described as a proverbial knife fight between the CrowdStrike Racing Oreca and the Proton Competition Oreca, leading to an inch-perfect finish in which Proton Competition emerged the victor by less than 0.02 of a second. Frankly, for any endurance race, much less a 24-hour one, to have a finish that close is a perfect encapsulation, to my mind, of how reliable race cars have become over the last few decades. And really, I'd be impelled to call it a tie if I were a race marshal, but that's one of the reasons that I'm not one. LMP3 was a walkover for the AWA Duquesne, finishing with a whopping 12 laps in hand over their nearest competition, after the pole-sitting number 33 retired with gearbox issues in the wee small hours of the morning. The GTD classes came down to the wire as well, with the WeatherTech Mercedes taking victory in Pro, despite a late race challenge by the Corvette, and the Heart of Racing Aston took home the regular GTD victory, as well as an overall GTD win, although that particular feat has no bearing on the point standings for those who keep track of such things. I myself really don't. I just like to watch racing for the spectacle of it. I think maybe a 10-point bonus for any GTD cars that finish ahead of the GTD Pro winner would be a nice little bump, but I'm a bit insane, so. Of course, the big news story after the race was the revelation that someone on the number 60 Meyershank racing team had been fiddling with their tire pressure data during the race. This led to a points penalty, fine, and probation for the team owner, as well as a firing of the race engineer, but the win was not reapportioned, nor were the Rolexes repossessed. It is worth noting that, at least based on publicly available information, this manipulation only occurred during the race itself, so the qualifying result and generally strong pace of the number 60 Acura during the rest of the week was not born out of this chicanery, somewhat reinforced actually by the similarly commendable performance by the number 10 Wayne Taylor racing car. This would come back to haunt the MSR team later, but we'll get to that at the end of the video. BMW had a rough time of the race, and undertook some serious additional work to improve their cars before the next outing at Sebring, while the Porsches had shown some promise, but also had issues, largely with general powertrain reliability, which is somewhat ironic given that the engine for the 963 is a reworked veteran of both the RS Spyder LMP2 from decade and a half ago, and the 918 hypercar, as mentioned in my video on the vehicle, and Porsche led the testing campaign for the integrated gearbox and hybrid drivetrain components that are standardized for all the LMDH cars. Anyway, on to Sebring. A few weeks before the next race of the season, IMSA released the first balance of performance updates for the season. Bit redundant, but okay. While generally lambasted as being heavy-handed, there is something to be said for the results it gets in keeping things competitive, and it is always easier to criticize than it is to act, which I do a lot in this video, so here is my active admittance of hypocrisy and a mea culpa, despite the fact that I will continue to do it. I could go either way on BOP as a concept and honesty, but would concede that adjusting every race is a bit overkill. In the case of the Sebring adjustments, however, that was fairly anticipated and not inappropriate, as Daytona is a very different track to most of the others on the calendar, and with a good number of new cars on track, some level of adjustment was going to be necessary no matter what. All of the GTPs had some level of weight added and power increased, as shown in this chart. LMP2 as an effective formula or spec class saw no changes. LMP3 seems to have been forgotten, and the GTDs saw these changes. The most significant change in the GT balances came to the new Porsches, particularly after lackluster performance at both Daytona and the Sebring test weekend led a number of the Porsche running teams to threaten a boycott and withdrawal from the series if they didn't receive some significant help on the BOP front. MDK Motorsports actually followed through with this threat, although the others were mollified by the power increase brought on by air restrictor changes. Mercedes and Ferrari gained weight, while almost all of the other cars lost some. Quick note here, while weight is consistent across all of the BOP classes, the GTPs have the rest of their BOP done through their maximum power and their maximum stint energy that they can consume, while GTDs also have weight, but are further controlled through boost ratio and boost pressures for turbo cars and the air restrictor diameter for naturally aspirated vehicles. So that's why looking at the GTD graphs, you've got a split in some cars showing up in one and the others showing up in a different one. I also apologize for not having pre-boost pressures for the turbocharged cars, because I'm not entirely sure if they were kept the same as they ran last at Road Atlanta last year to carry over to Daytona for this year, or if they reset every year. So rather than make an absolute factual error, I'd rather just omit. As I'm sure we all know, and in case you didn't, go ahead and find one of my early videos, the guide to the 2023 Super Sebring weekend, but Sebring International Raceway, in its current guise, consists of 17 corners on a course just over 3.74 miles, including two of the most difficult turns in all of motorsport, the 17th and the 1st, made all the more challenging by the inherently changeable paving, consisting of massive concrete slabs designed to welcome back B-17s to terra firma as they prepare to proselytize the ever-Anglo-American blessing of peace through superior firepower. Well, or through superior trade negotiations, but let's not let this turn into the worst Star Wars episode until Disney stepped in.
Right about one thing, Master. The negotiations were short.
Practice and warm-up saw the Acuras and Porsches lead 4 of the 5 sessions, with night practice topped by the Wayland Cadillac. The GT classes were more split, with Corvette topping 2 sessions, but no clear leader emerging. Qualifying saw the Cadillacs really turn on the afterburners, with the Wayland car and the number 01 factory-ish Chip Ganassi run entry the only competitors to break the 146 barrier, although Ricky Taylor was not terribly far behind with a 146.1 in the fastest of the Acuras. The MSR car, perhaps in a show of circumspection after their skullduggery in Daytona, ran a respectful 5th place, following the number 6 Porsche of Matthew Jaminet. The number 7 Porsche again crashed during qualifying and had its 2 fastest laps deleted for causing a red flag, but they were at least able to post a time this go-round and found themselves, somewhat amusingly, in 7th position, sandwiched between the 2 BMWs. Times remained close, with just over a second separating the fastest and slowest GTPs on what is a much more challenging track than Daytona. Mr. Keating again put his LMP2 on pole for the class, but this time closely pursued by 2 TDS racing cars driven by Francois Herrault and Stephen Thomas in 2nd and 3rd respectively. Glenn von Berlo led the LMP3 field ahead of Tony Kazamets, and the fastest GTD, the Pro number 3 Corvette, driven by Antonio Garcia, actually outqualified the slowest of the LMP3s. The Racer's Edge Acura was the fastest of the regular GTDs, which I'm going to start calling green TDs instead of regular or standard, just to keep things fun and a little bit easier to roll off the tongue, driven by Kyle Marcelli, and 4th fastest overall in the GTD class. 3 GTs had their times disallowed or failed to set a time, the Pfaff Motorsports Porsche for causing a red flag, and the number 95 Turner BMW and Team Korthoff Mercedes were both hit with the naughty stick after their drivers exited their respective vehicles before the end of the session, which I think is a bit of a silly rule, but oh well. Race stayed on warm for the season, and Sebring International Raceway was bursting at the seams with spectators, especially as this was the last, for the time being, Super Sebring weekend. The Friday 1,000-mile race will be covered in the companion WEC video, soon to come. Though the track had not released official attendance reports for more than a decade, best estimates placed the crowd at north of 250,000 and possibly as high as 300,000 before the fire marshal stepped in and said no more people allowed. The event was decidedly one of the more safety car heavy runnings of the once around the clock race as well, with almost 4 hours of yellow flag conditions split across 12 distinct deployments that started almost immediately after the first green flag dropped, when the ill-fated number 33 LMP3 crashed at the start of the race and had to return to the pits for new pieces of bodywork. They also picked up an extra penalty for improper emergency service procedures as well, which I think goes in the books as an oops. Once the race resumed, the racing remained close, especially in LMP2, until slightly over an hour into the race, when the now repaired Sean Creech Motorsports LMP3 went off at turn looks like 8, but managed to keep going. However, he was followed by George Kurtz in the CrowdStrike LMP2 number 04 car, who did the same thing and unfortunately high-centered his vehicle and had to be helped off by the safety crew, kind folks that they are, but this brought out another safety car as a result. One of the LMP3 cars, the number 17 AWA Duquesne, also managed to run out of fuel, the goofballs. Other spins not tempting the safety car out in the first hour included ones from Brendan Iribe in the Inception McLaren, Dwight Merriman in the Aero Motorsports Orica LMP2, and Dennis Anderson in the high-class racing LMP2. This safety car lasted a while, almost half an hour. When the race resumed, the Cadillacs did seem to have a bit more pace than they did at Daytona, and the yellow number 101 car, unlike John Hindhaugh, I am not contractually obligated to call it gold, led for a significant portion of the race before a fuel leak in the 9th hour brought it into the pits with smoke and flames coming from the rear. Taking lessons from, or perhaps interested in an internship with the Tower Motorsports team, Robert Mao in an LMP3 had 3 separate incidents with other cars, including a spin that nearly ended the Wayland Cars race, and, far more inexcusably, a rear ending of Dane Cameron in the number 6 Porsche during one of the many safety car periods. As the day wore on, the Acuras started to make their presence known as well, battling closely with the Cadillacs and Porsches, and seeing the number 10 car inherit the lead after the Chip Ganassi 01 car decided to seek alternate employment as a barbecue. Of course, this all came to a head in the final moments of the race, when, shortly after resuming from safety car number 11, the Wayne Taylor Acura fulfilled its purpose as a Porsche-seeking missile in a perhaps slightly overly aggressive plunge for first place with almost 20 minutes still remaining, going off track and losing control before somehow collecting both of the 963s with which it was battling for overall victory, and granting top honors instead to the pole-sitting Wayland Cadillac. The plenitude of safety cars, 4 in the final hour alone, enabled the GTD Pro winning Pfaff Motorsports Porsche to go a staggering 1 hour and 52 minutes on a single tank of fuel, which is nearly twice its usual endurance, and granting Porsche their 101st class victory at the track. Similarly, the GTD winning Paul Miller BMW managed an hour and 48 minutes on their final tank, and managed to take home class honors despite brake issues throughout the race. The LMP2 winner and third overall was Tower Motorsports, who ran a pleasantly clean race, surprisingly, and became the first P2 class car to earn a spot on the overall podium in over a decade. BMW's second place on the podium was welcome for the team, as their other car had retired after 172 laps due to overheating. In total, 14 of the 53 entries in the race were DNF, but even the lowest-ranked retired car, the Triarsi Competizione Ferrari, managed 95 laps before succumbing to alternator issues. After the 36 hours of Florida to start the season, it was time for the 4 3/4-ish hours of California. I guess that's all they could afford, with gas prices being so much higher on the West Coast. Another round of BOP adjustments came before the next round at Long Beach, with all GTP cars receiving weight reductions from Sebring and commensurate changes in power, as seen on the table here. GTD cars received adjustments as well, seen here. In all, it pretty much just is puts and takes based on the performance from the past few races, but having them occur every go-round is, as I've previously said, a bit much. It was a much smaller field as well, with only 28 cars entered, and only GTP and the 2 GTD subclasses competing. Practice sessions and qualifying had the 2 Acura GTPs all but uncatchable, a huge turnaround from the previous generation DPI. The fastest non-Acuras were the better part of a second behind in both practices, and the number 01 Cadillac was just shy of half a second behind the number 60 in qualifying, but the number 10 Wayne Taylor racing car bested them all and punched in a 109.9 over 6 seconds, 0.6 seconds, quicker than the number 60. The Astons and Lexuses comported themselves well in GTD, or Green TD, and GTD Pro, with the Green TD entry from Heart of Racing topping the GT timetables, pursued closely from the Pro AIM Vassar Sullivan Lexus and the Pro Aston. Pfaff Porsche and Corvette, both also GTD Pro cars, came next, followed by the second Green TD, the other Lexus. The Porsches overall struggled both in GTP and GTD, with the GTP 6th and 8th, last of all the prototypes, in the qualifying standings, and the non-pro GTD Porsches largely clustered at the bottom of the ranking. Though this race was only 1 hour and 40 minutes long, it certainly didn't lack for entertainment value. On the first lap, there was quite a kerfuffle between the Blomqvist-driven number 60, Sebastian Bourdais driving the number 01, and somewhat the number 25 BMW of Nick Yellowly, when everyone wanted to be in the same space at the same time. Bourdais outbraked himself and hit the wall, while the Acura received some unwanted touching from the Beamer, sending it into a spin and bringing out the safety car, costing the number 60 car a lap, while the Cadillac was too damaged and retired from the race. Cleanup took only about 10 minutes, with the race resuming with 90 left on the clock. Some aggressive driving took place between the Inception McLaren and one of the Turner BMW cars at turn 11, and again a few laps later, which earned Chandler Hall, driving the BMW, a free trip down pit lane in the form of a drive-through penalty. The number 10 Acura held the lead of the race until the first round of pit stops, when an issue with the vehicle's clutch left them stranded on pit lane for critical moments, while the rest of the GTP field rejoined. The Porsches took first and second from the pits until turn 7, when Pipo Derani and the Wayland Cadillac made a rather excellent overtake to split the pair. The Acura was fighting to gain back places from 5th, getting one back when Derani pitted about halfway through the race, and another when Connor D. Filippi, now driving the number 25 BMW, miscalculated his approach to turn 6 and ended up in the runoff area. One of the Porsches, Matt Campbell's, was struggling with its tires and losing positions, first to Ricky Taylor's Acura, then to the number 25 BMW, which had also managed to set the fastest lap of the race shortly after its spin. With mere moments left, the Wayne Taylor racing car was charging hard and quickly made up the ground to the leading Porsche of Matthew Jaminet. For the second race in a row, however, a miscalculation on the part of the Acura driver, this time Ricky Taylor instead of Philippe Albuquerque, led to a loss of control and a nosing into the tire barriers. Fortunately for all those involved, this time there were no other cars collected, and there were no injuries but to Mr. Taylor's pride, I'd wager, but a hard time of it for the car that had been dominant for so much of the race. The race finished under safety car, with Porsches taking home their first race victory, BMW on the second step of the podium, and the other Porsche rounding out the GTP top 3. GTD Pro saw Lexus take top honors, followed by Corvette and the FAF Porsche, while the Paul Miller Racing BMW took the GTD win, Green TD win, their second of the season, followed by the Heart of Racing Aston and the other Lexus. Those M4s may be over-grilled, but they are definitely quick. They've shown similar strength in Pilot Challenge this year as well. Incidentally, I'm not discussing Pilot Challenge in this video because of time constraints, but for any of those of you looking for an easier way to learn the vagaries of multi-class racing, the Pilot Challenge races are a great way to do so. I am working on a video as sort of a general primer to multi-class, but it's proving tricky to hit the right balance of concise and informative, and I keep deviating onto side projects like this. Anyway, on to Laguna Seca. Fairly light BOP adjustments were announced for this race, with weight and power adjustments for GTP as shown here. GTD saw even fewer, with the BMWs gaining 10 kgs, or kilograms, and the McLaren having a 5-liter reduction in fuel tank capacity. Fun times. Far more interesting, though, was the long-awaited debut of the first customer Porsche, run by JDC Miller Motorsports and in a remarkably yellow paint job that has led some people to dub it the Banana Boat. I like this moniker, and will be making use of it through the rest of the video and hereafter, at least until they... I had written repaint it here, but I have a sneaking suspicion it's actually a wrap. So, rewrap it. Their full-season drivers are Simon Vanderhelm, who at age 19 is doing much better than I am at not quite yet 29, but that's as may be, and Audi LMP1 veteran Mike Rockenfeller. The 2 free practice sessions and qualifying had the Porsches find their feet in a more conclusive display of strength than we'd seen from them thus far in the season, with the number 7 car topping all 3 sessions. The number 6 and 60 were the next most consistent and landed in second and third on the grid as well. The Banana Boat was last in the GTP category, behind the 2 factory BMWs, but given that they'd only taken delivery of the car something like a week prior and therefore didn't really have any meaningful track time with it, I think that's fairly excusable. For the first time in the season, Ben Keating didn't top the LMP2 chart, conceding pole position in class to George Kurtz in the CrowdStrike car. Porsches performed well in the GTD classes as well, with both Pro and Green TD led by the Pfaff and Kelly Mossworth Riley entries respectively. They were also the 2 fastest GTDs outright, pursued by the 2 Heart of Racing Aston Martins, then the rest of the GTD Pro field, and then finally a good showing for the delightfully dinosaur-themed Rexy Porsche from AO Racing. Despite remarkably heavy fog in the morning, it cleared just in time. Actually, if you do want to see just how thick the fog was, go ahead and watch the MX-5 Cup races from that race weekend, which, incidentally, you all should be watching MX-5 Cup races anyway. They are the most entertaining 45 minutes sessions that you can possibly get anywhere, short of watching a demolition derby. But I digress. Anyway, despite remarkably heavy fog in the morning, it did clear just in time for the race to start at its set time, albeit with some rescheduling of other events. At the green flag, aggressive driving from the number 60 Meyershank Acura pushed both of the car's front row Porsche Penske cars wide at the first turn, with Jaminet and the number 6 having an enormous lockup, dropping nearly to the back of the GTP field and almost hitting the number 10 Acura as he attempted to rejoin. The number 7 Porsche dropped to third, with Colin Brown in the MSR Acura taking the lead, followed by the Wayland Cadillac under the command of Pippo Durrani. Again, it took less than a lap for the safety car to be deployed, following an incident with the Windward Mercedes and the Gradient J.G. Wentworth Acura. The Inception McLaren also pitted with its right front tire off, followed closely by Sheena Monk's Acura with broken rear suspension, spelling a quick end to their race, although they did complete repairs sufficient to rejoin later, only to then subsequently retire again on lap 75. 10 minutes in, Dwight Merriman spun the Era Motorsports Orica LMP2, but to no ill impact apart from leaving some very valuable tire rubber on track. The number 60 Acura, driven by Colin Brown, canoodled right off, opening up a half-second gap almost every lap between himself and the pursuing Pippo Durrani, who was opening a similar gap between himself and Matthew Jaminet in third. The newly arrived Jarrett Andretti-driven Andretti Autosports Aston Martin was having some teething issues, also spinning on track fairly early in the race, and ending its race entirely mere moments later when it made contact with the erstwhile pole-sitting number 6 Porsche, pirouetted across track, and suffered a heavy impact at the entry to pit lane, bringing the race's first retirement and the second safety car. I say first retirement. The Gradient Acura, as I previously mentioned, would retire, but after this point. Looking at the crash, it perhaps goes without saying that the pits did not open immediately or very shortly after the deployment of the safety car, despite ordinary procedures dictating that it would have done. The pole-sitting GTD Pro car, the FAF Porsche, found itself with a stop plus 60 penalty for blowing the red light at the pit lane exit during the safety car, shortly before the damaged Gradient Acura rejoined the race. The race did produce some very entertaining moments with around an hour and 45 minutes to go, so let's take a quick watch. Nothing specifically important in the outcome of the race from these moments, but gosh, it's entertaining. Obviously, I muted the audio for reasons. Just a bit naughty for Philippe Albuquerque going through the corkscrew, but I do think he managed to make the pass stick without getting hit with a penalty. Bad luck for BMW, but them's are the breaks. Of course, such entertainment could not be allowed to continue unabated, and the Tower Motorsports car reverted to type, attempting to knock the number 20 high-class racing car off track and damaging its own suspension, which then caused it to acquaint itself with the tires a few turns subsequent, and ending that car's race, the second retirement of the event, and bringing yet another deployment of the safety car. Unfortunately, Mr. Ferrano, who was driving the car at the time, was injured in the accident, and it took several months for him to happily make a full recovery. As much as I dislike the Tower Motorsports team, I do not wish ill on any of the personnel on there, and it's good to know that he was able to recover fully. This safety car lasted almost 20 minutes, and it took, again, less than a lap for things to go pear-shaped, this time for the number 7 Porsche, as it lost control late in the lap and hit the concrete wall, heavily damaging the rear bodywork and potentially more gubbins inside. The issues were compounded by traffic, rendering him unable to make it to the pits until one lap subsequent. With essentially all of its bodywork replaced, it was able to rejoin, but would finish 8 laps off the eventual winning GTP. The Cadillacs seemed to find their pace at the restart, with Durrani building an enormous gap for himself in just a few laps. With just under an hour left in the race, one of the Lexus cars had a substantial incident just after the last turn, bringing out another safety car while it was extricated from the wall and setting off a flurry of strategic pit stops for those who could make it to the end of the race without another stop. The Inception McLaren lost the fueling hose that it had left the pits with several laps prior, for shame, and this madwoman decided it was time to do some rowing exercise. I have to admire her dedication, I suppose, but it does beg the question. The high-class racing LMP2 nearly took out one of the pit crew of the Rick Ware racing team as they conducted their pit stops, not a very high-class move, and earned themselves a penalty quite appropriately. After the restart, with about 42 minutes remaining, Rexy picked up an advertising banner, costing them most of the positions they'd earned throughout the race thus far, while both the GTD Pro Aston and Corvette picked up hefty penalties for an improper pass-around. Happily, this represented the last bit of shenanigans until the end of the race, which saw Renger van der Zande put on a spectacular performance to bring the egg yolk yellow number 01 Cadillac to take the checkered flag, followed by the number 6 Porsche, driven by Nick Tandy, and with third going to Alexander Sims and Pipo Derani of the number 31 Cadillac. TDS Racing took home the top honors in LMP2, followed by the PR1 Matheson car, and third went to the number 04 CrowdStrike, all of them Oricas, as we knew. No LMP3s in this race, and the GTD podium were all ahead of the GTD Pro top 3, so Green TD podium, with the Kelly Moss Porsche, Turner BMW, and another Kelly Moss Porsche, your top 3 in Green TD, with GTD Pro taken by the WeatherTech Mercedes, followed by Aim Vassar Sullivan's Lexus and Faf's Porsche. The party then went to Le Mans, which I will discuss in the WEC Season in Review video, and IMSA racing resumed with the Salen's 6 Hours of the Glen. BOP adjustments were more significant, especially in GTD. For GTP, all cars received some not insignificant weight added, and power outputs changed slightly as a result. In the GTD class, the Lambos, McLarens, Ferraris, Corvette, and Mercedes cars all lost weight, with Corvette and Lexus receiving power increases, and both Acura and Lexus having changes to their fuel tank size, as noted here. Must be exhausting to make these changes every race, both for the race organizers and, I feel, much more so for the mechanics and pit workers that have to go and fiddle with all this stuff. The number 60 Acura again led both practice sessions, but while second and third were occupied by the two Penske Porsches in Free Practice 1, Free Practice 2 saw both of the Team RLL BMWs instead take those places, with the number 25 driven by Connor De Filippi, a mere 0.004 of a second behind the MSR Acura. The GTDs were the only cars that really got to have a qualifying session, which saw the Italian manufacturers comport themselves with the most dignity. The US Racetronics Green TD Lamborghini set the fastest time overall, pursued closely by the Risi Competizione Ferrari and the Iron Lynx Lamborghini, both in GTD Pro. Weather conditions deteriorated as the LMP2 and 3 qualifying session got underway, and rather than have the entire field sliding hither, tither, and yon, after several cars actually did so, the session was red-flagged quickly, and the GTPs never even got on track at all, with all prototype grid places being set by teams' championship standings. Changes in the weather forecast before race day happily implied that race day would be dry but cooler than initially expected, which led Michelin and IMSA to approve the use of a different tire compound than had been planned, the first instance of this since Daytona, necessitating an overnight marathon drive by some rather heroic chap within the Michelin organization, who definitely deserves some extra shekels and a cupcake as a result. Fortunately, the forecasts were accurate, and race day dawned without any terribly inclement weather expected. The green flag flew at the scheduled time, and again, it took mere seconds after the clock started for the carnage to begin, with the number 24 BMW of Augusto Farfus losing control on his cold tires and attempting to limp back to the pits after all of the GTD field flew past in a rather perilous show. But the front right suspension was badly damaged, and the team had to retire the car. Not a good season for BMW so far, it feels safe to say. About 15 minutes subsequent, the number 51 Biohaven-sponsored Rick Ware LMP2 managed to lose its front left wheel due to a hub failure, leading to its retirement as well. With less than a half an hour elapsed, there was a touch between Pippo Derani's Cadillac and the high-class racing LMP2, causing the Oreca to spin off track, and somehow managing to collect 2 LMP3s as well, although all of the cars managed to escape major damage. The same corner, turn 11, also snagged the number 11 TDS car about 6 minutes later after, surprise of surprises, the Tower Motorsports car hit the back end of the leading number 52 PR1 LMP2, spinning it and sending the TDS car into the wall as it tried to avoid the incident. This brought out the first full-course yellow of the race. The TDS car had significant damage to the front suspension, but managed to duck into the pits and behind the wall, where the team was able to effect repairs and get it back on track. The Tower Motorsports car also had damage, as well as a malfunctioning radio, but good riddance. I'm not saying I could do a better job, but
Man's got to know his limitations.
Oh, they also picked up a drive-through penalty for ignoring minimum fueling time guidelines as well. Absolute muppets. The GTD pit stops brought on a flying tire from the Heart of Racing Aston, picking up one left over from the Corvette team's pit stop. Happily, it didn't end up on the track, but it was quite close. This obviously brought on a penalty for unattended pit equipment, which was an unusual error for the Corvette team, who are typically paragons of excellence on pit lane. The Porsches maintained their lead, and Matt Campbell had a stellar restart, with the sister car of Nick Tandy pursued closely by the number 60 Acura, but they were promptly whacked with the naughty stick for pit lane speed violations, so it became a paper tiger in that duel. The close of Hour 1 saw a spin from Sebastian Bourdais in the number 01 Cadillac as he tried to overtake the Happy Buddha Porsche, which I think is a Kelly Moss car, but I like the Buddha livery. Oversteering and hitting the wall with some moderate force, but also making minor contact with the pursuing BMW, necessitating a new nose and brake duct repair for the number 25. There were also 2 other minor incidents that did not bring out the safety car in the minutes preceding Mr. Bourdais' mistake, which I've also spliced in here. The full course yellow was out yet again, lasting until 4 hours and 45 minutes remaining. The Windward Mercedes retired around an hour and a half into the race with a mechanical issue, and about 50 minutes later, that's 5-0, the number 7 Porsche went behind the wall with a hybrid issue, necessitating lengthy repairs that dropped it from contention entirely. The number 6 Porsche, driven at the time by Mathieu Jaminet, remained in the lead with a not insignificant gap between himself and the Acura number 10 of Philippe Albuquerque. Just on the other side of the 3-hour 30 remaining mark, it was the Acura's turn to lose a tire, the right rear this time, and then land a second drive-through penalty for pit lane speed violations, essentially costing them any potential avenue to the win as well. And really, the number 10 has just not had a very good season either. Through a rather clever strategy play, the Wayland Cadillac managed to position itself well to lead at the halfway point, capturing vital points to the championship. The Heart of Racing Aston was not quite so circumspect, but alas. It was more than 2 hours until the safety car found itself needed again, a welcome block of green flag running, when a 4-car pileup occurred involving the number 01 Cadillac again, the second-placed Lamborghini and GTD Pro, the number 38 LMP3, and one of the Green TD Lamborghinis, brought about by the LMP3 miscalculating its braking point and plowing straight into the back of the 2 dueling Lambos, with the Cadillac left unable to avoid, unfortunately. Alex Kirby, driving the LMP3, was placed on a 4-race probation for his responsibility in the incident, and the Chip Ganassi team must have been looking at a very serious carbon fiber bill for this weekend. Anyway, happily again there were no injuries, and 20 minutes after the safety car was deployed, it returned to pit lane, and the Wayland Cadillac maintained the lead it had captured over an hour previously, but pursued more closely by the number 60 Acura and the number 6 Porsche. Lexus, Aston, and Corvette led GTD Pro, while Porsche, Lexus, and BMW led Green TD. Oreca, surprisingly, was going 1-2-3 in LMP2, and the Duquesne of Nicolas Varone led LMP3, pursued by two Ligiers. The Whelen Cadillac held the lead until it pitted with an hour and a bit to go, losing their position briefly to the MSR Acura, but ultimately to the number 25 BMW once the pit stop cycled. The Cadillac also found itself under attack by the number 6 Porsche until Nick Tandy overtook with 1 hour and 13 minutes to go, taking advantage of its warmer tires to then build its lead and start hunting down the 8-ish second gap to the BMW. This didn't come to pass quickly, and the number 6 picked up the lead only when the BMW pitted with 45 minutes to go for its final stop. When the number 6 pitted, it had more than 55 seconds in hand, but it was an insufficient gap to maintain the lead through the pit stop cycle. Tandy swapped out with Mathieu Jaminet for the finish and emerged seconds ahead of the number 31 Whelen car, which immediately tried to challenge to recover the place it had lost, but no dice. Adding insult to injury for their day, the number 10 Acura spun at 36 minutes remaining, with reportedly a locked brake caliper and loose wheel, again, finally ending their day. Contact with the back of a GTD car blunted any charge that Pippo Derani might mount, and Jaminet was slowly but consistently taking time out of Connor De Filippi's lead in the BMW. A mistake by Anthony Garcia in the Corvette with 20-odd minutes remaining lost him 2 positions at the lead of GTD Pro, likely due to tire wear, as it rapidly lost time once the Lexus and Ferrari had gone past. With less than 10 minutes remaining in the race, the number 6 Porsche had bridged the gap to the leading BMW, and the vagaries of traffic provided the opportunity that the Porsche needed to make the pass for position with 6 minutes to go. Shortly after this, the Turner McIntosh BMW had a major shunt and roll that destroyed the rear end of the car, and the safety car emerged with 3.5 minutes to go, granting Porsche their second outright win in the season while building their championship lead, at least until their disqualification in post-race scrutineering showed their front skid plate to be slightly under the minimum required thickness, promoting BMW to victory, followed by the number 31 Whelen Cadillac and the number 60 MSR Acura. The CrowdStrike LMP2 victors included first-time podium topper George Kurtz, followed closely by the Era Motorsports and PR1 Matheson teams. LMP3 was won by the Riley Motorsports team in a similarly close battle with the Junior 3 and AWA cars. Lexus put on a masterclass in both strategy and pace, taking first in both GTD classes as well as first and second overall for GTD, with the Risi Ferrari and Corvette rounding out the Pro podium, while Paul Miller BMW and Wright Motorsports Porsche did the same for Green TD. Whelen led the GTP Championship after Porsche's disqualification. CrowdStrike led LMP2, Riley LMP3, Ambassador Sullivan GTD Pro, and Paul Miller Green TD. In an increasingly common refrain, free practice and qualifying were both led by the Acuras in GTP, with the front-engine cars seeming strongest in GTD. Pro saw Lexus out-qualify the WeatherTech Mercedes and Heart of Racing Astons, while Green TD was topped by the other Heart of Racing Aston, pursued by the other Lexus and one of the BMWs. No LMP2 race for this go-round, for whatever reason, but LMP3 had 6 entries out of the 34-car field, led by Riley Motorsports and followed by Junior 3 and AWA. Oh, and Pippo Derani qualified the number 31 Cadillac in third for GTP behind the 2 Acuras. Despite its qualifying pace, the number 12 Lexus had to start from the pit lane after the team swapped an engine in what was reportedly a record time of only a couple of hours. Either way, that's quite a commendable effort, and the number 12 did not stay at the back of the pack for the whole race. Going to slip BOP in here after free practice and qualifying because I somehow forgot in the initial scripting and recording to include BOP for the Canadian Tire Motorsports Park round at all. So, we're getting one more ad-lib, which seems to be another increasingly common thing in some of my videos. Anyway, small weight losses for all of the GTPs, just a few kilograms off of each, and a commensurate slight decrease in all of their stint energies, whereas the power outputs all remained pretty much the same except for BMW, who received an extra 2 kilowatts. On the GTD front, a little bit more of a puts and takes type thing. Had a couple of cars, the BMW... Actually, it's just the BMW that lost weight. Everyone else that had changes gained weight, so that was Corvette, Ferrari, Lamborghini, McLaren, and Mercedes. Minor changes to restrictor sizes and boost ratios, and a little bit of fuel added for Acura and McLaren, while Lexus lost 3 liters as well. Despite concerns around tire degradation, the race started cleanly, I'm happy to say, and actually ran pretty quietly through the first round of pit stops, with the only major change in the standings seeing the Porsche number 7 jump the number 31 Action Express Cadillac. I know I keep calling it the Wayland car because that's easier, but I figured propriety needs to make an appearance every once in a while. But otherwise, it was business as usual. Quite a refreshing change from the carnage-filled last few races in that vein. Nice passing action at just about the halfway mark from the number 10 Acura, putting a lap on the number 24 BMW, and it was shortly thereafter when the first safety car finally appeared after the GTD Pro Aston Martin lost control just before the halfway mark, after making contact with the WeatherTech Mercedes. This one I thought was a pretty difficult call to make on incident responsibility, but the stewards eventually placed blame on the Mercedes. Either way, it was day done for the Heart of Racing Pro car. A strange incident also occurred when the number 24 BMW was trying to get around some of the safety vehicles during the pass-around, and Philip Ang just completely bollocked up his braking and nearly ended up stuck in the gravel, in the wall, or collecting one of the safety vehicles, depending on which choose-your-own-adventure page you turn to in your race book, any of which would have added injury to insult, and even without it, earned the BMW a drive-through penalty for unjustifiable risk, which I would call an entirely justified penalty. The pit stops saw a few position shakeups, namely with the number 10 Acura taking over the lead from the number 60, which dropped back to third when the number 31 Cadillac moved up into second. The FAF GTD Pro Porsche found its way into the lead somehow, as did Catherine Legg in the JG Wentworth Acura after they stayed out through the safety car period, opting instead to pit with 57 minutes remaining and take the track position advantage. Green flag running resumed with 1 hour and 8 still left on the clock, and some serious battling between the FAF Porsche and Lexus in GTD Pro opened the door for Anthony Garcia in the Corvette in third to nip through without issue into the lead of the class. The number 14 was soon back down pit lane with either smoke or steam pouring from the front left of the vehicle and sending it behind the wall for repairs, ending a streak of podium finishes for the car that had lasted nearly a year and a half. The second full course yellow was called with 53 minutes to go after one of the LMP3s spun just past pit entry, and though the driver got it going again fairly quickly, we still had 6-odd minutes of low-speed circulation before racing resumed. 10 minutes later, it was Turner's turn to get the elbows out, perhaps over-aggressively, in an incident with the remaining Lexus, damaging the number 96 suspension sufficiently for it to end up stranded on track, and bringing out full-course yellow number 3. The Corvette seems to have had remarkably good luck in getting front-row seats to these incidents without actually getting involved. This time, racing resumed with only 24 minutes to go, with both of the Acuras still in the lead, but the number 60 very tight on fuel to hit the race end. Despite that particular question mark, the number 60 flew off the start, while the number 10 was more closely battling with the number 25, at least for the first lap or so, and pursued a bit further back by the Banana Boat Porsche, leading its two Penske counterparts. Good effort from them, all told. We also here got confirmation that it is indeed at the request of Cadillac that the number 01 car is called gold rather than what I've decided to call it, which is egg yolk yellow. So just for reference purposes, here's that small soundbite.
For the 01, the gold-fronted Cadillac from Cadillac Racing and Chip Ganassi. Somebody's just asked me if that's gold, what is the Hertz car in WEC? That's Hertz Racing Gold, very specific. And Cadillac have asked us to say that is the gold car in the Cadillac stable. There's a gold, a blue, and a red car.
The second-placed Mercedes in GTD, or Green TD, unfortunately lost their position following a flat on the right rear, continuing a string of bad luck for that team. Poor chaps. AMG GTs were still in third in both Green TD and GTD Pro, however, and Inception's McLaren was making a strong effort up the GTD field, challenging the Paul Miller BMW for the lead with about 10 minutes to go. Felipe Fraga forced the Garrett Grist-driven Junior 3 LMP3 off the track while battling for the class lead, just before the number 01 car went off at turn 8, likely a combination of brake lockup and contact with Augusto Farfus's BMW at 5 minutes to go. In yet another amazing display of how safe these racing cars are these days, Renger van der Zande was able to exit the car with no notable injuries, the second time he'd had a rather colossal off in a yellow Cadillac this year following an incident at Spa. The Augusto Farfus BMW was also handed an additional penalty as a result. The race finished under yellow again, with Acura taking a 1-2 sweep for the first time since Daytona, and with less chicanery, pun intended, this time, followed by BMW's number 25 for a second straight podium. The number 5 JDC Miller Porsche did a wonderful job to outlast and outcompete the two factory Penske cars, coming home fourth. The Riley Motorsports Car 1 LMP3, although I think they deserve an asterisk next to that win. Corvette took home top honors in GTD Pro, followed by Pfaff Porsche and Mercedes, with the Paul Miller Racing BMW winning Green TD, the Inception McLaren, and another Mercedes completing that podium. When it's time for a GTD-only race. It's nice to keep things simple sometimes, a bit of a palate cleanser in the middle of the season. This race had only 20 entries, split between GTD and GTD Pro, or Green TD and GTD Pro, and the short 7-turn, 1.53-mile circuit at Lime Rock Park saw lap times in the low 50s for all cars. As far as BOP, the Mercedes cars had 10 kilograms of weight added, as well as 5.9 horsepower and 1 liter of fuel, and the Porsches were allowed to shed 20 kilograms. Quite simple, so no chart today, and I think most of the rest of the BOP updates will remain the same, as they do get a lot simpler. The GTD Pro cars all qualified ahead of Green TD for once, with Heart of Racing almost 0.2 of a second ahead of the Aim Vasser-Sullivan Lexus and 0.3 ahead of the third-placed Corvette. The race also started smoothly, with the GTD Pro Aston making its speed known and drawing out an almost 2-second lead in less than 10 minutes, which is quite a gap for Lime Rock Park. The Gradient Racing Acura of Sheena Monk attempted to play a rather long-shot strategy in trying to stretch their first stint as long as possible, but this came more or less to naught as the Andretti Autosport Aston and Kelly Moss with Riley Porsche collected each other around the 2-hour remaining mark while battling for position in the middle of the pack. The number 91 was able to resume, but had enough damage that its hood flipped up and made it rather difficult for Alan Metney to find his way back to the pits. The Andretti Autosport Aston had to retire, their second retirement in as many race participations. The green flag flew again with 1 hour 51 remaining, with Aston, Lexus, and Corvette in GTD Pro and the overall lead, but 2 BMWs ahead of the third-placed Heart of Racing Aston in Green TD, although the Aston quickly made up a place to overtake Patrick Gallagher in the better placed of the Turner, actually wearing a Tacos livery this weekend, BMWs. The Heart of Racing Pro Aston again seemed to have another gear or something, and had built another nearly 2-second gap to the pursuing Lexus in about 10 minutes. Lexus and Corvette seemed to be quite evenly matched in their battle for second overall, while Roman DeAngelis' Green TD Aston had retaken the lead of the class, and also built a tidy 2-second lead to its closest pursuer, one of those Tacos BMWs. For those of you who are unaware, not that I expect it's many of you, the livery is a reference to the fact that the Turner Motorsports team goes out for tacos after any race win. I think it's a nice tradition, but I love Mexican food, so, you know. The race continued fairly smoothly until about 1 hour and 4 minutes to go, when potentially an incident and potentially an accident involving the Inception McLaren and I think one of the Vassar-Sullivan Lexus cars sent the number 70 McLaren into the wall in a pretty big way. Brendan Arib was happily unhurt, but it was day done for the car that was running second in class at the time. The safety car deployed again to allow for cleanup, and the green flag flew with 48 minutes to go, essentially a straight sprint to the end for the field. In a familiar refrain at this point, the Astons just canoodled off without issue yet again. A slow departure from the pit lane, apparently due to a stuck clutch, had dropped the Corvette behind the Pfaff Porsche, but they remained close together on track to the end of the race, the Corvette unable to find an opportunity to make a pass for a podium spot. The number 12 Green TD Lexus received an enormous penalty for speeding in the pit lane, apparently going 44 kilometers an hour over the limit, which is basically insane. But there we are. With about 15 minutes to go, things had bunched up again somewhat, with the top 4 GTD Pro cars all within a second or so of each other, and the leading Aston in Green TD closely pursued by 2 Porsches, but the short 7-turn course and high quality of the driving provided no surprises in the closing minutes, and GTD Pro finished with Heart of Racing in the lead, followed by Lexus, Pfaff Porsche, and Corvette, while Green TD finished with Heart of Racing in the lead, pursued by 2 Porsches and a Turner BMW a bit further back. No tacos today. Next up was the race at Road America on Sunday, August 6th, with practice the preceding Friday and qualifying on Saturday. 45 cars were entered across all 5 classes, with the most notable debutante, the second customer Porsche 963 in the field, entered by Proton Competition and wearing a very fetching WeatherTech livery. Road America looks a bit like Sebring International Raceway that got left out in the sun for too long and turned a bit melty. Going by the unofficial moniker America's National Park of Speed, it has 14 turns over a 4.048 mile or 6.515 kilometer length, and is one of but a few circuits in its originally designed configuration, albeit with repaving and other maintenance updates, since it first hosted races in 1955. Minor BOP changes saw 2 kilograms reduced from the Acura's weights, GTP Acuras, while 1 was removed from the BMWs and Porsches. All of the GTPs also received a minor increase in stint energy, but no change in power. The Green TD or GTD Mercedes vehicles lost 10 kilograms, and the NSXs got another 3 liters of fuel allowance. As I alluded to last time, I think it's nice to see that even though we're still getting hit with BOP every round, it is nice to see that they're getting at least a little bit less heavy-handed with the changes as the season progresses. The Cadillacs were fastest in practice, with both the 01 and 31 cars topping the charts in the 2 sessions. A total of 8 red flags were flown between the 2 sessions due to numerous crashes. In fact, I'd go so far as to guess that there were probably 8 of them. And offs, but qualifying went more smoothly, with Pippo Durrani putting the Wayland Cadillac on pole mere hundredths of a second ahead of Matt Campbell in the number 7 Porsche. The Wayland Action Express car put down a 1:47.7 as its fastest lap, and all of the GTPs, even the new Proton car, were under the 150 mark. CrowdStrike led the LMP2 field, while Heart of Racing again took the top spot for GTD Pro, but the Paul Miller Racing BMW found itself as the fastest Green TD qualifier, splitting GTD Pro between the 3rd fastest Corvette, driven by Jordan Taylor, and Jack Hawksworth's AVS Lexus. However, Pippo Durrani did not take the start of the race in the lead, as co-driver Alexander Sims crashed the V-Series R in morning warm-up at turn 13. In addition to the rear suspension and extract gearbox being damaged, there was extensive bodywork that no longer did work, and the Action Express team had to work feverishly to get the car ready to start the race from pit lane, replacing the majority of the integrated drivetrain behind the engine, that is to say, the gearbox and hybrid systems, the rear suspension, the rear wing and body clip, and the undertray and rear diffuser. As such, the number 7 Penske Porsche instead took the start, not taking pole position. The technical pole position was left empty, but so the number 7 Penske Porsche started from the front row by itself, although this was a bit of a moot point, as the first lap ran under the safety car with the number 25 BMW anxious to make its mark, and electing to do so through some interpretive Zen gardening after it spun and beached itself in the gravel. The number 31 was able to start at the back of the GTP field, well, back notwithstanding the Buddhist BMW, rather than the back of the grid, and didn't lose the championship points earned for pole position, and thus retaining the championship lead. So it was more of an inconvenience than any meaningful impact to their race or championship aspirations, as even a 2-hour and 40-minute long race offers plenty of opportunities for gaining or losing 10 places. Durrani quickly made up a place on the Proton Porsche, but couldn't get past the banana boat on the same lap. The number 85 LMP3 of Jerry Kraut had a bit of a spin while battling with the number 30, driven by Ari Baloch, with slight contact, and while no major harm was done, the number 30 earned itself a drive-through penalty. Yet again, the GTD Pro Heart of Racing Aston built an early lead, which was quickly negated when the number 25 BMW ground to a halt shortly after turn 11, following a heavy slide into the wall that was precipitated or at least exacerbated by cold tires, and bringing out the safety car for the second time in 10 minutes. Racing resumed 12 minutes later with the JDC Miller Porsche, driven by Mike Rockenfeller, and the non-crashed BMW, driven by Philip Ang, making a rather smooth pass on the number 10 Acura, uncharacteristically at the back of the field, after he went wide on one of the early turns. Rocky clearly wanted all of the positions and made a rather daring lunge down the inside, headed to turn 5, and then subsequently ran perhaps a bit wider than was advisable on the exit of the turn. Philippe Albuquerque took that opportunity to take his place back, with Pippo Durrani following suit, although this latter pass didn't stick. Matt Campbell in the leading Porsche was the only car running sub-150 laps, boding well for their race speed, and opening up a rapidly growing gap on the number 01 egg yolk-colored Cadillac. The 79 WeatherTech Mercedes Green TD took an early pit stop with 35 minutes elapsed, hoping the safety cars would fall in a favorable way to grant them track position, followed shortly by the GTD Pro Aston. Ben Keating had worked his way up to first in LMP2 after starting further back in the field than we usually expect from the Texan. And just before we ticked over to 2 hours remaining, the number 57 Windward Racing Mercedes was spinning all over the place, headed down to turn 8, damaging the right rear suspension beyond effective repair and leading to the car's retirement, although happily not a safety car deployment, as Russell Ward was able to limp it back to the pits, kindly using his emergency hazards to let everyone know his car was poorly. Considerable chap. With an hour and 34 or so to go, there was further dicing between Ricky Taylor, still driving the number 10 Acura, and the JDC Miller Porsche, although with no major incidents. The number 5 car went past with ease, as the number 10 was still working its tires up to temp. Taylor found the heat he needed in the tires and passed the number 31, which was still heating its rubber up, and the number 7 Porsche had likely similar issues, but with more than 10 seconds in hand over the number 01 Cadillac, it made little and less difference on track. Alexander Sims, still struggling with tire temperatures probably, spun the number 31 Cadillac at around 1 hour and 26 to go, and managing to rejoin, although he dropped back to 6th overall. Ironically, this came just after Sims had set the car's fastest first sector time for the race. Vagaries of the track, I suppose. But fortunately, at this point, the race rather settled down for a while at that point until about 56 minutes remaining when the number 29 Junior 3 Motorsports LMP3 crashed coming out of turn 10, leading to its retirement and marking the third retirement of the race. There was a beautiful overtake by the Corvette on the Heart of Racing car for first in GTD Pro, with the Aston struggling a bit with its colder tires and being pushed offline, but not off track by decidedly gentlemanly driving between both Antonio Garcia and Ross Gunn. The final round of GTP pit stops left the front of the field largely unchanged, although the Acuras worked themselves up into second and third. But it was quickly followed with another entry in the DNF column, as well as the crowning moment of BMW's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day, when the number 24 was forced to retire at around 45 minutes remaining with gearbox issues, grinding to a halt after only just starting another lap, before sort of restarting and then just not. The GTD Pro battle heated up again, with a scooch of contact between the Aston and Corvette, but no harm done, and then the Corvette got hit with the naughty stick for a fueling infraction, effectively handing the lead to the Heart of Racing team uncontested, and all but ending Corvette's race. Matthew Jaminet, or Jam Jam, in the number 6 Porsche received a new rear wing due to some odd right side damage. Meanwhile, there was a small regatta featured at 37 minutes remaining, so let's enjoy that for a moment as they give us a regular palate cleanser in the race footage. 34 minutes saw the inevitable go at some rallying by the number 74 LMP3 car, losing a few seconds but avoiding any walls. BMW attempted to salvage their day, sending the number 25 out, and it managed a whopping 2 laps before heading back behind the wall. Sad Oompa band noises for the Bavarians here. The rest of the race, however, ran pretty quietly, and the Porsche number 7 had what can only be described as an excellent race, leading pretty much unchallenged, notwithstanding pit stops, and finishing ahead of the 2 generally high-performing Acuras. The number 60 MSR Acura was quite close on track, but the number 10 Konica Minolta car that finished third was more than half a minute behind. 2 cars managed to run out of fuel with mere moments to go, so get those drinking game cards out. The Turner Motorsports number 96 BMW and the number 77 Wright Motorsports Porsche. It had to happen at some point in the season, I suppose, and apropos that it takes place at such a long track. The number 52 Wins liveried PR1 Matheson car of Ben Keating and Paul-Loup Chatin took home top honors in LMP2. The number 74 Ligier of Josh Burden and Gar Robinson won LMP3 despite their brief journey to the wonderful world of rallying. The number 23 Heart of Racing Aston won GTD Pro, followed by Lexus and Corvette. And Paul Miller Racing's BMW took home top honors yet again in Green TD. Okay, for those of you still with me, let's take a quick break. Get yourself a drink and snack, because good God, this is a long video. We've got another GT-only race to go, plus the Indianapolis Sprint race and Petit Le Mans, which I probably made a little bit longer than I needed to, but season closer and all. And then post-season updates. I ended up having to cut the video in 2 and upload it separately because of the size and length. So while this was originally intended to be just a straight continuation into the back half of the season, instead, hope you will join us in a few moments for the start of part 2. Thanks much.